just squeaking an important win against the Jaguares, and I mean, the results of late have brought up the debate again about the new conference format, this sort of perceived imbalance. It does seem to be quite a clear sort of chasm between the various conferences, but also the Sunwolves kind of justifying their inclusion all of a sudden, and talk from sort of Sansa boss Steve Tew saying that expansion's inevitable. So obviously because of the broadcasting rights. So I mean, where do you sort of stand on all of this?
Yeah, you get sort of mixed signals, as you say. It's difficult to sort of make a definitive judgment, saying Super Rugby shouldn't expand because certain teams are really weak. And then you, as you say, you look at a game like the Sunwolves holding the Stormers, who are supposedly among, the sort of team who potentially could, challenge for the title. So it sends out quite a confusing picture. Jaguares, obviously, they are struggling a little bit on paper, but they're also running a few teams really, really close. And I've got to say, you mentioned that game that the Sharks played in Buenos Aires. I was always nervous about it, and I just think that the Sharks did outstandingly well to winkle out the win there. Never mind that they were outscored 3 tries to 1, and it was obviously a really passionate display by the Jaguares, to such an extent that it looks as though a couple of them lost their heads and minds with sightings for dangerous tackles and biting and so on. So obviously a very difficult place to go. So I'd sort of hold off on saying that they don't look worthy of Super Rugby. I think that they're running teams close enough to suggest that they will be stronger, I would think, next season. I think the Jaguares will get used to the idea of being on the road a lot. That's a huge disadvantage for them. They have to do so much mileage to play anywhere. Whenever they play away, it's not like just sort of popping up to Johannesburg or Durban from Cape Town. It's a long haul wherever you play away. So that makes things very difficult for them, and they'll adjust to that. So it's a tricky one. And there's talk about perhaps an American side coming into Super Rugby, say, and as Garen said, perhaps not next year, but say 2 years down the line, once they let this Super 18, if you like, sort of settle a little bit for next season. And then the possibility of more teams. And then that will just turn it into one giant, almost like in Europe, where you have so many teams contesting, for sort of European supremacy. You're going to just have this massive, far-flung competition that turns into this big, huge sort of league. Whereas, it used to be a boutique competition with sort of 10 or 12 really, really strength versus strength sides. So it's not easy. I mean, there are no hard and fast answers on this one. You see, good developments in the current format, and you see very bad developments in the current format. So nothing sort of hard and fast.
And Karen, do you think the trick is just for viewers to be patient and let the sort of the new sides adjust to the format and just see how it goes?
I think it's going to have to come down to that. Geographically, they just are so widespread. The poor Sunwolves, I feel the most sorry for them. I think the Jaguars will be fine because they've got players that play in the Rugby Championship. They're used to traveling to South Africa, Australia, New Zealand. The poor Sunwolves, they just don't have the depth. They're based in sort of Tokyo, Singapore. They're always going to have to travel. You remember how South African teams moaned about traveling to first world countries like Australia, New Zealand for 2 or 3 weeks. The poor Sunwolves have to make 2 trips to South Africa in this tournament. They're pretty much on a hiding to nothing. They're going to be competitive in certain matches like we saw this weekend, but then in other matches they're going to lose to teams like the Cheetahs by 92 odd points. So there's going to be this massive differential between their performances. They just don't have the depth and the players to play sort of week in, week out. They're going to have to sign some New Zealanders. They've Rion Fullion playing there at fullback for them. But I personally, I would like to see like Samoan teams, Fiji teams, Tonga teams, which aren't too far from New Zealand and Australia, being incorporated perhaps into their leagues. We're so used to now the New Zealand 5 and the Australian 5 that we've seen for many, many years now. But from a South African point, we've got the Jaguares, we've got the Sunwolves that are different. The Kings have come back into it, so we've changed more than they have. I think it'd be nice to have those sort of Tonga, Fiji, Samoa teams incorporated in the New Zealand and Australian conferences. It's not much of a travel factor for them. Perhaps the Sunwolves sort of need to relocate further out of Singapore, perhaps closer to South Africa. But having said that, what would we think if the Stormers suddenly upped and left and made it a home for themselves in Singapore somewhere? So, you've got to get that fan base. There might be some European teams that are sort of included at some point. The travel factor, obviously, for South African teams to Europe isn't so great. But, 18 is a lot. I miss the days of Super 12, Super 14 even. It's a little bit easier to understand the concept of the tournament. But, I fear money talks, broadcast rights, it all boils down to that. Nobody's really turning up at the stadiums. That's the problem. You saw some very, very empty stadiums, which on paper were really big matches this weekend and in every other weekend, unfortunately. So I'm not too sure what the solution is, but far smarter people than me trying to work this out. So hopefully they come to a solution. 18 is a lot of teams. 20, 24, where do you draw the line? It might become a case of we just, the Stormers, for example, aren't playing any New Zealand teams, so there are no New Zealand teams for the Newlands faithful to see this year. Do you just want to have a complete split and we play our own tournament and they play their own tournament and then we just find a winner of each conference and then they just play in the final type thing? And then there's obviously not as much travelling back and forth. So maybe something along those lines is the solution, but